quick last check.
And we are recording, we are all set.
All right. So with that, a good reminder, in fact, this meeting will be recorded. So in case you missed something or would like to follow back to the session, we'll make this available following the call. And then for anyone not able to join, we'll have the link available for you to send to your colleagues or anyone interested in learning more. We are still waiting on one more panelist, and we'll work through the details of getting her involved, but we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Clean by Design Chemistry and Wastewater Program launch. This is a massive milestone for the project team that's been involved in this effort, leading a pilot over the last almost 2 years in total. We're glad to have more than 40 attendees on the call thus far. We expect more to join due to a lot of interest in this session, and we hope to share some information, but also get an engaging group discussion going. So please feel free to enter questions into the chat or to raise your hand and we can call on you. I see we do have Linda joining in, so perfect timing as we get started. I'll just begin going through the slides. So with that, here's the agenda for today's meeting. We'll share a little bit about AII, the organization heading up the initiative, along with our project team, an overview of the program itself, the Chemistry and Wastewater Best Practices Framework, the Clean by Design process and how all of this essentially got started and what to expect, and then getting involved. We will have some time hopefully for Q&A. However, if we have questions along the way, we'll certainly answer them as well. But without further ado, I would like to share the presenters for today's meeting. They're provided here in order: Dr. Linda Greer, Dr. Siva Paridi, and Klaus Nuttbaum. All from organizations who have provided a significant amount of support to this project in various forms. And then myself, I'm Kurt Kipka. I'm the head of programs at Apparel Impact Institute, overseeing programs development of efforts such as this, where we see opportunities for bringing certain activities forward within the industry, along with key strategic partners, as you'll see today. As a reminder, this meeting is recorded and we'll make it available to individuals not able to join, but also just a good reminder for anyone asking questions to keep yourself muted. I believe we have everyone muted for now, but perhaps for the panelists, keep yourself muted as we're moving through the program. And then just a reminder too, we have a very diverse group of participants on this call based on the registration. We do see this call as being ideal, though, for supply chain practitioners, whether it be from brands or suppliers, aiming to reduce impacts of hazardous chemicals and wastewater treatment issues. That doesn't mean that other similar stakeholders from industry organizations, consultant organizations, or other initiatives won't find value from this discussion, but just know that our target audience are individuals who might find this program valuable over time. So now I'll transition into an overview of Apparel Impact Institute, or AII, as we like to refer to ourselves. Very simply put, AII identifies, funds, scales, and measures quality programs. In some cases, we'll develop out new projects like the one we're sharing today. In other cases, we may find really cool projects or ideas that we support or even endorse in order to bring brands, suppliers, and industry stakeholders the best quality programming in an aligned fashion. Our focus is on aggregating the industry. So whenever possible, we try to develop a network of practitioners, a network of practice versus a large global team, a large global presence, knowing that there's amazing work that's being done out there, and really just a need for product standardization or tool standardization can significantly lead to scale within this industry. Areas of impact which we cover: energy, water, chemistry, and materials. Last week, we provided an overview of our energy and water programming. If you were not able to attend that meeting and would like more information, please contact either myself or my colleague Bryant, and we can send that webinar over to you. And materials is an area of development for us as we look to incorporate the impacts of energy, water, and chemistry into production. We'll also look to areas of opportunity for whether it be circularity in the supply chain or also inputs from the production process to materials. However, today, as I'm sure you're all aware, the focus will be on chemistry and wastewater treatment. As an overview of AII's partners, we categorize them in a number of different ways, but to give you a sense of the organization and our involved participants, we have founding and strategic partners, which you can see on this slide: GAP, Arvind, PVH, Sustainable Apparel Coalition, Natural Resources Defense Council, IDH, and HSBC. We also have programmatic brand partners who decide to work with us on a case-by-case basis on specific programs or partnerships that we take forward. And then we bring philanthropic funders to our programming as well, which really kind of fits the magic, if you will, of certain programming aspects. Which I'll demonstrate here. The majority of our current programming follows a 1/3 funding model, meaning that in a case where we're developing interventions both within a brand supply chain and a particular facility, a brand will bring 1/3 of the program funding, a facility will bring 1/3 of the program funding, and then AII through our matched donor pool can bring 1/3 of that funding as well, ultimately subsidizing and driving down the cost of programming. The other aspect of what really unlocks the theory of change in AII's vision and programming development is the idea of co-nomination, synthesizing facility lists, synthesizing the supply chain to the extent that we know a number of brands may work with one particular supply chain provider. So instead of mixing messages, priorities, and even tools, we work with the supporting brands or participating brands in order to have aligned messaging, aligned tools, and even reduce costs or shared costs in working with a given facility. So in both cases, tapping into our match funding model, but also our co-nomination and list synthesis process, we're able to drive down the overall cost of programming for the industry using high quality programming and aligned resources effectively. So with that, I'd like to share more about the particular program, the chemistry and wastewater launch, which we're all here today to learn about. This came about as an idea, actually, which was brought about by facilities that Clean by Design historically had worked with on energy and water programming. We've established a very solid and productive program focusing on a best practice framework, identifying the areas of opportunity that nearly all facilities can make progress on. And when we've had this conversation surrounding energy and water use in particular, facilities have asked us, can the same framework be replicated into chemistry and wastewater treatment? And we've played around with the options for proceeding with it for quite some time. And finally, Dr. Linda Greer, who's on the call, I convinced her that we should give this a go. And we brought Siva and the team at STS into the conversation. And that is what brings us here today. After about 2 years of development and piloting, we feel confident in the proof of concept we have for using a theory of change that's been proven on the energy and water use front for nearly 10 years into the chemistry, chemicals management, and wastewater treatment front as well. So with that, before we even set out to develop the program, and now as it exists today, we wanted to develop an approach that would rapidly increase the industry's progress. There's obviously very successful, strong programming and initiatives that exist. And our partner, Klaus from Ddhc, or the Implementation Hub, is a great example of the industry's scaled approach for creating tools, creating training. However, we wanted to develop something that would begin to expedite that process using the great tools, using the standardized platform that Ddhc has created. And so with that, we wanted to deliver a program that has quantified impact reductions using an existing best practice framework. utilizing new and existing tools. So we're not creating anything new unless we find a gap that we can easily fill. But even then, those tools become either information that we share back to partners or with the industry publicly in order to progress this process along. And then, of course, aligning with leading industry efforts. There's really no need to recreate the wheel. And instead, this becomes an improvement mechanism within the ecosystem of chemistry programs and initiatives that exist in this industry. And with that, providing a collaborative improvement framework. And Klaus later on in this call will share a little bit about how this Clean by Design program fits into the ZDHC ecosystem. I've already alluded to this somewhat, but I think it's certainly worth calling out in the development of this program, and what's got us to this point is support from development and implementation partners, STS or Sustainable Textile Solutions, and Dr. Siva, his team. Also, Tamara Wolf from the organization has been critical to the program's success. The Natural Resources Defense Council, Linda Greer Consulting, Dr. Linda Greer, GIZ, who provided initial seed funding to get the best practices off the ground, and of course, ZDHC as a partner to carrying this work forward. In terms of pilot participants and sponsors, we're incredibly thrilled and excited that PVH, Gap Inc., Target, and Arvin Mills saw the opportunity that this program could present and supported the pilot process as it now becomes ready for scale. So with that, I'll just give you a sense of the timeline of best practice development, and we'll talk about the details of how we got from the very beginning of this program to here when Dr. Greer shares more information. However, in terms of where we are overall within the program, we started a pilot last year, and of course, due to COVID-19 issues that we're all experiencing, certain aspects of that pilot have been delayed or moved out. But fortunately, we've been able to put the learnings that we intended to achieve within this pilot into practice and see the results, the potential for results enough such that we're able to model the program simultaneously to piloting to bring it to scale, which certainly fits within the AII vision of success in terms of rapidly bringing proven concepts and tested concepts to the market, knowing that we can always iterate along the way, but we want to learn by doing in this case. And we've certainly learned a lot through this process that we're happy to incorporate into the program going forward and to continue to learn and incorporate into the program going forward. It's certainly not a stagnant process in that way. So now as we launch this process with all of you on the call, we're in the portion of our modeling for scale that would help have us secure partners and funding the financial support to get the process off the ground, essentially finding facilities and brand partners to bring to the market so that we can kick it off formally this fall with recruitment efforts and targeted facility efforts in key locations. And we'll get to more of that a little bit later as well. But first, I want to pass over the conversation to Dr. Greer, who will share more about the best practice framework dating back to the historical success of this approach and why it's been successful as we've approached it within the chemistry and wastewater areas of impact. So, Linda?
Great. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, clear.
Okay, great. I'm on a hot spot here in a location that's having a thunderstorm, so anything could happen. Hopefully we'll be fine. Let's go ahead and click through this whole slide so the whole thing is presented at once. And I just want to spend a minute at the outset to talk about how we developed the best practices that we're about to describe and to highlight some key features of that development. Basically, we did this along the lines of success that we had in our original Clean by Design program, where we had developed best practices, and at this point, we have now tested those best practices and delivered quite impressive results at hundreds of textile mills around the world. So we felt that we had a good path forward for doing the same sort of work for the chemistry and wastewater best practices. And I would say that the keys to that success was not just to outline what needed to be achieved, but to spend a lot of time understanding and outlining how that work could be achieved, and to provide sort of the path forward for mills to be able to deliver those results. A second key feature of our work was that the program is based in quantitative measurement of both the baseline when we get started and then the results. This is important both for accountability of the program to the participants, but also very important to us because it allows us to continue to learn. That is, we're tracking all along what of the best practices are adapted, how they're working in each individual mill, and that will allow us to continue to mature and fine-tune our program. Next slide, Kurt. And so getting back to not just the what we want to achieve, but the how we want to achieve it. I have called this program success, attributed this program success for many years to the fact that it really is a combination of good engineering and psychology, and that both of these features are important to get to success. So it's really critical to understand the mills and where they're coming from, the pressure that they're operating under in terms of cost and time to production, and the calls that they receive to improve things that they don't even perceive are broken in the first place. So in order to impact change, I think it's very important for us to really understand how the mills work, why they work that way, and then understand the problems that they are experiencing so that we can solve their problems and not come in just with a sort of a to-do list of things that are the problems that we think that they have. It's also important to identify the critical obstacles to the program, some of which are experienced by the mills themselves and some of which are bigger problems in the ecosystem where we operate. I think is maybe the next slide, Kurt. I'm trying to remember if the next slide is, no, just pop back to the other slide for one more minute. In terms of the critical obstacles that we have identified, I would say the ones that really move forward are a lack of technical expertise that exists both at the mills and in the countries where we're operating, that there are also key data gaps at the mills that undermine their ability to take stock of what they're doing and where they want to change. And to be honest with you, there's a sort of a tepid on-again, off-again drive presented by the brands to motivate change in the industry and motivate change in the mills. You know, the fastest way for the mills to conclude that a program like this is important to their business interests is to hear from important customers that they would like to see improvement in this way. And I would put that on the list of the top three pinch points in the program's success to date. So now I'm ready for that next slide, where I'll quickly go through the methodology, the sort of stepwise process that we use to develop the best practice framework. So the first phase was a research phase, and this was a sort of a classic read a lot of literature, talk to about a dozen experts who are very well known in the field, and Dr. Siva was the preeminent expert that we worked with, along with some others, to then create a long list and then a short list of candidate best practices and review that short list with this team of experts. So let's call this the bench phase of our work, where we just did a lot of reading and educated ourselves about the possibilities. And then for the second phase, I would say this is where the Clean by Design approach distinguishes itself from other work that is out there, because we took our candidate list to a pilot at 7 mills and went into those mills with eyes and ears wide open to learn what appeals to the mill in terms of solving problems that they actually think are real problems. What will work in those mills and what will not work? and really be hard on ourselves to scrutinize our best practices and pressure test them to see whether or not they're apt to be applicable and helpful in places around the world. In the pilot, we have a design for these mills to not just evaluate our best practices from an academic perspective, but to actually go ahead and develop action plans, implement the best practices that work for them, and then allow us to confirm their effectiveness. And then we plan to peer review those results with selected experts to make sure that we're right about what we think worked and didn't work. As Kurt mentioned, our pilot has been slowed down by the COVID virus, although we are still able to kind of shape out our best practices in a pretty good way because we were fortunate to be able to run all of the early visits at the pilot mills with Dr. Siva and his team prior to the onset of the travel restrictions. And so we already picked up a tremendous amount of additional input into the 10 best practices. And then for the third phase, which is ahead, is we will then be able to take the learnings and develop this into the scaled up program. We plan to integrate it with energy and water impacts programs so that we can bring a full package to the mills and then to launch the program at scale. So next slide, Kurt, is to kind of open the curtain to what are these mysterious best practices we've been talking about for the past 5 minutes. So there are sort of 3 areas of the 10 best practices. The first area being for facilities to understand better what they are using. And these are 2 cornerstone best practices that go to the heart of that pinch point I was talking about earlier of factories missing key data gaps, key pieces of data that will really inform and instruct them and allow them to see where their problems lie. So this is undertaking a comprehensive inventory, which we have dovetailed into ZDHC tools and go beyond and above and beyond ZDHC, and then really pushing down on, tracking this chemical use, identifying discrepancies between what they think they should be using and what they're actually using, and really helping to surface where the chemical use patterns are. The next area for the 10 best practices is to reduce usages. This is in some ways crazy obvious and in other ways often overlooked in various green chemistry programs. This is about reducing the amount of chemicals that are used and thereby reducing the load to the wastewater treatment plant, thereby reducing the amount of chemicals that a factory has to purchase, and often reducing the process time, which will save more money in the long run than some of the other sources of savings in our work. And so this is what we did here for reducing usages, is find 5 areas where usages tend to go off track and be excessive for sort of no good reason. And then the final area of the best practices is greening chemistry. And so this is purchasing cleaner chemicals, by which I mean chemicals that have lower quantities of impurities in them, particularly important for commodity chemicals that are sometimes purchased as used waste streams from other industries. Procuring greener chemicals, which is where there's a close alignment to ZDHC, to bluesign, and to other greener chemistry programs. And then procuring chemicals with an eye towards the load that they are putting on the wastewater treatment plant. A sort of often overlooked kind of bad feature of certain ingredients that load up COD or nitrogen phosphorus to the EPT and then can be causes of compliance problems, which are huge headaches for this. For this industry. Let's see, I think we're ready now to go to the next slide. And for this one, I want to call on Dr. Siva. One of the best practices on reducing chemicals was to reduce chemicals that are needlessly added. So just to kind of introduce this topic, this is perhaps the richest area of improvement for many mills and comes as a bit of a surprise to people, except when they realize that, oftentimes the recipes that factories are using came to them from chemical salesmen who, let's face it, have a bit of a conflict of interest because they want to sell more chemicals. And so what Dr. Siva has often found is that there are chemicals that are used in excess, used even at cross purposes, that does go to the heart of buying more chemicals, but certainly we can do much better and deliver a win-win to the mills if we can scrutinize those recipes in the way that, that he is able to do. So Siva, I'm going to turn it to you to give this very inspirational case study story of this one improved recipe experience.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. And in fact, rightly said so. This is an example where we are talking about needlessly added chemicals and also improving the process. So importance of chemicals as well as process impact, which collectively created the impact on to the facility. So to give you a perspective, this production process is about a black shade, which is having cotton and elastane. The facility is using one kind of process steps. I don't want to go in technicality. Make a cotton elastane product to process to pre-treatment. So we change the process route and we change the pre-treatment route. Thereby we could manage to save 2 chemicals. So we eliminated 2 chemicals which was otherwise mill was using. And also by doing earlier the mill was complaining, because when we go into the facility to achieve their confidence, we also look at their pain points and also what are their maximum productions going on. So what the facility was complaining is about the curling. The fabric was getting curled and thereby it is getting lost. They are losing some amount of fabric at the edges. So in order to manage the curling problem, to attack the curling problem, and also the pre-treatment was modified and the change was done. The process was modified, the machine parameters were modified. For example, the speed of creel and the pump speed was lowered, and then there was some machine modifications were done. Thereby we achieved 50% or 45% of steam reduction. By pre-treatment and the machine modifications, the steam was reduced. Time was managed to actually reduce by almost 28% of overall time. Non-productive and operating times were managed, and steam was reduced, chemicals were saved, and overall we were able to achieve almost like $100,000 to $120,000 per year if you just take up this particular process. And the cotton elastane, for the facility, they have managed to shift their cotton elastane production process into this modified process, and then they started realizing in all their production processes the similar kind of savings. So I would say it's more of recipe evaluation, needlessly added. People may ask, oh, are they doing wrong by adding those chemicals? I would say no. Maybe it is not that they're doing something completely wrong. But to understand the process, you also need to understand the machine, the chemicals, and the fabric. So it's like riding a horse. You should know the horse well, then you can probably win. So it's like a combination, and it requires little bit of priming. You need to learn little bit more, and probably then you can save. So it's not that you can save in every recipe, but you can do a little bit of changes here and there and then achieve maximum impact. So that's the reason why we have changed the best practices from greener chemicals and processes. So there we have achieved the process part also, machine part also is able to come in there, and chemical part also is coming there. So I think this is one of the Typical example where I think the mill was so appreciative, as well as they saved a lot of wastage. Otherwise, the curling 2 inches was being wasted on both sides. That was eliminated. So I think it was overall a bigger impact created by a small recipe modification, I would say. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Siva. And one insight that Siva has shared with us, and I think will be so helpful in the Clean by Design program is, you know, on the one hand, factories have so many different orders, so many different fabrics and colors that it seems a bit impossible to imagine going through every recipe in the way that Dr. Siva has gone through this example. But he's pointed out that if we focus on, for starters, on black and white, maybe one of the most difficult recipes, maybe a red, and then one that takes the longest time to process, just go to the factory with those 4 to review, that we will likely cover about 80% of their production and headaches. And so that gives us a sort of a targeted way to implement best practice number 4. And then, as Dr. Siva just explained, we fully expect that as the mills learn from these examples, they will be able to apply the learnings to a number of their other recipes in the way that they're running the same equipment, et cetera. So I really think that we're onto something here. It does rely on a great deal of expertise that Dr. Siva himself has and his team, but we're fully committed to capacity building in this area and to teaching other experts to how to do this as we come up to scale. So next slide, Kurt. We're going to turn now to the second set of best practices, which have to do with wastewater treatment best practices. Now, this is an area where, you know, factories perhaps experience their biggest headaches, and their biggest concern is being in non-compliance and then having their production either suspended or, worst case, even shut down. And so we're very committed from both an environmental perspective and from the perspective of trying to solve the problems of this industry to help to sharpen up best practices in wastewater treatment so as to reduce those problems. So next slide, Kurt. Again, we have 3 areas of best practices here. The first is to ensure the proper design and capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. We know that in some cases, factories are victims of their own success. They have gotten larger and larger as their business has developed, and their wastewater treatment plant has not kept up. So the first set of practices is to make sure they've got the physical facility that they need in order to be successful. The next area of best practices is to monitor, and monitor their wastewater treatment plant. This again falls into that area where we know from our evaluation that basically factories are not collecting the data that they need in order to operate correctly. That's true in the process end, and it's also true in the wastewater treatment end. And so we have quite specifically indicated the areas of influent into the treatment plant, reactors at the treatment plant, and effluent out of the treatment plant that need to be monitored, basically with the philosophy that we need to detect problems early enough in the wastewater treatment plant that we can do something about those problems and prevent compliance problems at the end. So if the only thing a factory is monitoring is the effluent, which by the way is very common, they have a problem. By the time they have a problem, you know, there's like, you know, they're already in trouble. So you need to be monitoring way upstream, and we're quite specific about how and where to do that. And then the third area, and the one where I'll call on Dr. Siva to just help us to understand better what this really looks like, is to really beef up the practice of troubleshooting in the process and the treatment plant when problems arise. What we find is so often the problem is that something came into the treatment plant that is bigger than it can manage, and it was a big bad surprise, and that more active communication channels between the wastewater treatment plant and the process personnel would really help us out. So Siva, I was hoping you could give a little bit of texture and context to this area of the best practices.
So, yeah, Linda, thank you. In this particular case, we often find that the effluent treatment plant management and the production management both are two parallel lines which are working on their own in their facilities, but they never meet each other and they never talk to each other. And production manager feels that he is the head of the production and he has the right to produce whatever way he wants to, and he can discharge so that there is someone else who is sitting there out there and he has the capability to manage whatever he discharges. And he do not even have a courtesy to tell or communicate to the to the ETP manager that I am going to use this particular new process or a new product completely, and can you manage it? That's not happening. That will not happen. That can happen with the buyer, but that will not happen internally. So this is the major stumbling block, and that is exactly the reason why in CBD we managed. In order to manage effluent treatment plant, you have to ensure that you have a chemical management program, and you need to have the chemicals, because it is those chemicals which are coming back to the effluent treatment plant in some way or other, and they are managing the loads. That's exactly the reason why in the last section of greener, we have load management and ensure that you have a lower load procurements also, because we are always looking at why we say beyond ZDHC is because ZDHC is always talking about what not to, because we have restrictions and we have kept restrictions and we say that this I don't want. So therefore people think that anything which is otherwise is fine. That is not the case, because there are so many chemicals out there which are clearly compliant with ZDHC or with RSLs or MRSLs, but very difficult to manage in the effluent treatment plant if you don't have a right process. And that is where we need to align and educate. It's also an education process, and make people sit together and talk to each other. What is the problem which is he's facing as a effluent treatment plant person? And then the production manager realizes, oh, maybe I am doing all production on one day. He should not have done all 3 tons in one day. He should have done production planning in proper way, that 1 ton in a single day, and then he could have planned it properly so that the load is not sent in one shot, rather than he distributes it. So it's a simple thing for us, but it's a difficult thing to manage in the production plant, and people egos. That's the reason why psychology comes into picture, because engineering is easy, plug and play, but psychology is never easy. One day it works and second day it won't, just because we don't do everything like robots. So that's the reason why CBD, I liked it the same way, like working with Linda was so nice, is because it is not, it is understanding the psychology and managing things to make things work. And that's where we talk about the active communication, and also upstreaming, predicting things before. So you collect the load calculations, you know what is being used. If disperse dyeing is done, maybe high AOX is coming, so I need to reduce and dilute it so that I manage my ETP program properly. Nitrogen is coming, so I dilute it, or I treat it properly, or anaerobic system is being managed, and all these things, because people know it. If they know that they are coming, they are prepared well. So that is what we are looking at in the troubleshooting aspect, so that you don't react, but you predict and slowly create the process in such a way that nothing is really coming to you as a shock. So that's something which we are looking at in this 10 best practices, on the last part of the best practices, which is little unique in a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Siva. I think that's where I pick up from here. So with that, setting the table using the best practices and the best practice framework, which we see to be highly successful in managing both the technical and psychological side of change management required for driving the improvement we want to see. I want to talk a little bit more about the process itself. And for anyone who's been a part of or who's observed the Clean by Design program and the history that exists there over the last 10 years, this should come as somewhat of a review, but just to give you a sense of how this process works from beginning to end. Once we have the best practices in hand, once we have the content for bringing it forward, there's an initial step which AII brings to the table for all of the programming that we establish a network for and bring to the market, and that is a form of aggregated planning. So the first step is getting a list of targeted facilities or locations where our partners may want to carry a process forward. And then we deploy that shared cost structure. Ultimately, wherever there's overlap in facilities or brands who might be wanting to work together, it's an opportunity to overall reduce the cost of implementing a program such as this. And then establishing aligned targets. Linda alluded to this previously, but the opportunity to integrate programming as it relates to chemistry and wastewater with programming as it relates to water use and energy consumption only makes sense, because as we look more and more at the best practices for these facilities, we're recognizing that we're treating a holistic facility, that pulling one lever can affect others, and in some cases have adverse effects on other impact areas. And so it's important that as we as an organization leading these impact programs have a clear picture of the targets that we're trying to achieve across all categories of potential impact or resource use. With that, once an aggregate plan is put into place and the metrics for success are clearly established amongst participants in that given program, then we can get into the process itself. And this is where, with a little bit of information from participants who are interested, we can fit this into an existing framework that has been proven to be quite successful. We launch a program with a kickoff, establish a baseline of performance, and then set a prioritized training schedule and planning process. Each facility creates their own action plan. That's a bit unique in that it's not a consultant or an expert advisor providing an action plan or suggested activities to the facilities. It's an interactive collaborative process with an expert consultant, with our staff of consulting advisors, to create an action plan that the facility believes in. And we found that to be incredibly important as we see success in implementation, in addressing the accountability that's needed for carrying out the steps to fully understand what's going to be done at that given location. Then we leave time for implementation. This is typically anywhere from 6 to 12 months. However, it can sometimes extend beyond the implementation timeframe for a typical program, just because of the large investment or the large retrofit that's being put in place. But typically our programs see that implementation timeframe right around 6 to 12 months, meaning a program itself is anywhere from 12 up to 18 months, give or take. However, in the current COVID world in which we live in, we are seeing some extended timelines, and rightfully so, within both our chemistry programming, but also within our water and energy programming, just recognizing that there's nuance associated with both the industry and production as it exists today, and also the availability of both funding and technical resources in order to implement the types of changes. However, fortunately, we have the flexibility to navigate those changes as it relates to each program that we deploy. Once that implementation is complete, however, there is a validation timeframe to ensure that the initial assessment of opportunities, the action plan that's been created, and the implementations that have been taken forward have all come together and come to fruition. That final assessment includes an analysis and calculations of the improvements that have been made, but also an additional opportunity assessment, fitting in with what is an ecosystem, if you will, of continuous improvement. It would be almost impossible, and perhaps Siva, you can share some of your thoughts on this as well, to complete all of these activities at one time within any 12 to 16 month period. What we've seen, and perhaps what has been an incredible learning through this process, is that we didn't even recognize it, but there's a pretty stepwise approach that we've been able to identify in building upon itself within this process. Siva, would you like to share a little bit about that, the stepwise activities that you've experienced thus far within the pilot?
Yeah, so when during the pilot, of course, the way in which we have chosen 7, someone would be asking why 7? Because we wanted to have a laundry, we wanted to have a printing the unit, we wanted to have a continuous dyeing, we wanted to have a continuous printing unit, and we wanted to have an exhaust dyeing unit, and also indigo dyeing. So all put together, we need to have, because though we thought that these 10 best practices would be fitting to all kinds of facilities, that was a challenge, because I never believed that 10 best practices can fit all types of variables, but I made to believe by Linda. Thanks for that. So I now believe in it. So when we approached them, every mill is different, and they were having at a different stage where they're in their maturity. So one mill is having a fantastic inventory to start with, they're managing their chemicals, and then they can directly go in and start working on their, where are the differences in the recipes, how much I am getting in and how much I am not using and wasting. So that clarity and that maturity, some mills can be. In some cases, mills are not even having the infrastructure to actually start looking at how to track them, how to measure them, and where they are, and the inventory is not there. So in those cases, not to rush to all 10 and make them do, it's better to make them first the level of track them, keep them properly, understand where you are using, and then slowly go to recovery and recycle. So what the chemical circularity, BP9 and BP7 and BP4, these 3 BPs, what are best practices when I say BP. So BP4, 7 and 9, I see that these needs to be done at a next maturity level. Don't rush them immediately, but each best practice can make people realize to improve further. So it's good to have all, but it's not easy, and it's not going to work at the same time. This project is not supposed to be taken to complete it, but this project is supposed to be taken to create impact. So slow and steady and make things work. That's the reason why I would see anything more than 12 months to 16 months is an ideal time. Anything less than that, I would say it is rushing on it. To put it
Thank you,
nicely.
Siva. And so with that, we recognize that if you're driving scale within a program like this, there still needs to be some form of tailoring or a bespoke offering for that individual facility's given performance at any point in time. But at least we have a system of speaking about these programs, these projects in an aligned way, fitting in with existing tools and frameworks within the industry. Soon I'll allow Klaus to speak a little bit more about that as well. But first, I just want to demonstrate some of the outcomes that we expect from this process, and that is facility level assessments, prioritized action plans, and results summary. Preparation and implementation of a chemical inventory that works specifically for that facility. There are great resources, and in fact, Ddhc provides incredible resources for establishing an inventory. However, there may be nuances associated with a given location's needs that need to be taken into consideration, and that requires a little bit of the psychological side of the programming, as Siva and Linda have both described. As a program facilitator, AII provides aggregate reporting at the industry brand and location / supplier level. So we're beginning to look at a little bit more of a macro level view, along with reporting and stakeholders like Ddhc and SAC for that matter as well. And then also quite important here is the capability to set and achieve measurable progress towards goals. So it's not just a matter of setting a target, but a stepwise approach to reaching those targets in the way that Siva just described. And then finally, results. And again, this is with 7 facilities that we've worked with thus far, but we've seen enough to feel confident in bringing this program forward as a way to influence change within the industry. And that is reductions in use and release in terms of pounds of chemicals. In this case, we anticipate seeing up to 182 tons per year of chemicals removed from the pilot facilities. That's an average reduction of about 24%. Increased awareness and expertise for influent and effluent management systems. In one hand, of course, reduction in the elimination of discharge exceedances. but also reductions in water, energy consumption, and steam consumption, which, as I mentioned previously, align quite well with taking a more holistic view of the types of activities facilities can undertake in regards to overall resource use. So with that, I do want to provide some time for our partner Klaus from the ZDHC to share his view on program alignment within the ZDHC ecosystem and the framework of tools that exists out there. So with that, Klaus.
Thanks, Kurt. I really appreciate the opportunity to present this one slide today. I know there will be a lot of questions that can't be solved by one slide, but it's really great to see this as it reflects the constructive and positive discussions that our two organizations have on the alignment. So yeah, I will play a little, Kurt, can you please click game here? So first, let's have a look at the, oh, stop there, please, not too fast. So first, let's have a brief look at the alignment with the ZDHC CMS framework, which is our chemical management framework, our How to ZDHC Bible. Well, the new version has been released earlier this year in May. So it's really great to see that it comes into place already here in this program. And I think the contribution also from Ziva and his team is definitely visible there, and also the input from the brands participating in the Clean by Design pilot. Secondly, I also want to mention the Ddhc Platforms. So the gateway, our multi-stakeholder yellow pages of chemical products, currently used by more than 35 brands, more than 1,100 chemical companies, and more than 4,000 suppliers, listing more than 50,000 certified chemicals certified by multiple standards. And it's our plan to provide participating Clean by Design factories with access to this gateway, so they can really leverage the gateway's capacities for the improvement measures. Then, of course, the Dhc Academy, our capacity building and training hub. And this is, I think, also a quite interesting discussion in the future, how we can incorporate it as well. The latest platform also to mention here, Supplier to Zero, which is basically providing suppliers with a self-evaluation and a bunch of 100 recommendations and 150 hands-on guidance sheets. But this can only lead towards implementation support that can be provided by Clean by Design in this case. And of course, the ZDHC solutions that Kurt briefly already mentioned here, yeah. Click again, please. So if we look into the CMS alignment in a little bit more detail, we can see that the Clean by Design program approach is pretty much aligned what we had in mind there for the CMS. So Clean by Design is basically setting a strategic implementation framework for the ZDHC CMS on chemical management, and is going beyond, which is basically also where the Supplier to Zero self-evaluation will come in handy later on. And I think that will be part of the next cohort to test this a little bit more. Furthermore, Clean by Design is also operating with STS, whose staff is an ZDHC accredited training provider, experience in the ZDHC principles. And yeah, that's, I think, that the connection point also to the ZDHC Academy. The 10 best practices for chemical use, like Linda already explained, specifically the know what to use and go greener, are linked with the implementation of the ZDHC chemical management policies. And that's for Mill's success. And I think the in-check report could be something that we need to look into in the next phases of the project, as now it can basically connect the inventory of the facilities to the gateway and cross-check the ZDHC MRSL conformance. And that's, I think, where this project is also going beyond, because it is explaining to the factories how the chemical inventory can also be used for efficiency gains and for benefits. And last but not least, on the 10 best practices for wastewater, which are aligned with our wastewater guidelines, well, the Clean by Design on-site support can really help factories in understanding where to measure, why to measure, and how to improve also in terms of root cause analysis. And I think this is a great example of how ZDHC platforms and solutions can support the Clean by Design program in supporting the factories. And that's really why we are talking and why we are working together, because we have this collaborative impact in mind. And that's where we want to go also in the future and for the future cohorts.
Thank you, Klaus.
Thanks, Kurt.
With that, there's a couple of questions that I want to address before wrapping things up. A question from Ian is regarding the details provided surrounding the best practices. And Ian, the short answer there is that we've tried to keep things relatively high level as we're launching this program now. There's more than enough information to keep you interested to support each of these best practices, if then scenarios, if you will, which we've developed and refined along the way, providing more of the technical side of bringing the framework forward. And that's something that we can share with you as we further our discussions regarding the program going forward. And then another question, I'll answer it, but Siva, perhaps you can also confirm or just clarify as well, is regarding the results from the pilot in terms of energy, steam, and water reductions. I believe those came just from chemistry management practice.
Only the process and recipes, not from the energy part. So that's what I would say. When we are aligning chemistry and energy together, I think we can multiply, or we can actually 1 + 1 will not become 2. I am sure that 1 + 1 will become something more than 2. I'm not sure how much, but it could be something more. So that is why it's better to take it all 4 in the same line and path, because there is some reduction which is possible from the process. There's some reduction which is possible from the utility side point of view, and efficiencies point of view from the utility side. Yeah.
And you know, that just calls out something that we realized very early in the pilot process, that we've got to look at this holistically. When we're getting into this level of detail and sophistication, it's important to begin looking at a holistic view of the facilities that we're working with in order to capture the 1 + 1 equals something more than 2 opportunities that are provided here. So with that, I'll just briefly provide a look at next steps. And essentially what we'd like to do for interested organizations is set up a one-on-one-on-one, meaning that it will be a partnership conversation between STS, AII, and brands or suppliers who might be interested in joining, with the intention of bringing together an aggregate program going forward, prioritizing the facility locations, the geographic locations, and facility types we will bring into the program heading into 2021. So in the meantime, as we arrange these calls, please contact myself or my colleague Bryant, but begin thinking about which facilities or locations are most interesting to you and the approach that you might be taking. We'll work together then with interested organizations to develop a rollout cadence and process as we head into next year. And then our ideal scenario is to begin mill recruitment in December of this year. All of this, with all timelines in the year 2020, are meant with intention. We're intending to do all of these things. This is our structure. We'll be flexible with geographic locations and timing as the current economic and health environment evolves. But just know that we want to proceed, and we want to work with organizations who are doubling down on achieving impact during this time and in a post-COVID world. And then we do expect phase program kickoffs beginning in January 2021, and we'll prioritize locations accordingly. Now, as we wrap things up, I know that we've answered some questions in the chat. We are at time, so there's an opportunity here to answer some further questions, or I'm happy to take questions after the call as well via email. I'll stay on the line here, though, for just a couple more minutes for any further questions or comments that come through the chat. With that, however, thank you so much for joining this meeting today. We hope that you learned something. We hope to pique your interest, and we'd love to see everyone on this call get involved in the program in some way, shape, or form. Thank you to all of the panelists as well, both for your time today, but also the time that you've put into this program to date. It's an exciting moment for this work as we proceed, and I can't wait to see what it brings in the future. Okay, so one moment for questions here. I'm not seeing any coming through. Also not in the chat from what I can see. I'm honestly surprised. So I hope to get some questions following the call. All right, with that, for the sake of time, thank you everyone for joining the meeting today. I look forward to working with all of you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Yes.